Today on Locked On Suns, Kevon Looney in the news as his guarantee date on his contract looms at the end of the month. He even admitted he doesn't know if he's long for the Golden State Warriors. So, with the Suns in the market for a rotation center of some kind, is there a fit? Let's go.
You are Locked On Suns, your daily Phoenix Suns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And we're back. This is Locked On Phoenix Suns, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Brendon Kleen, your host. Welcome into the show. I'm a credentialed media member covering the Suns for the past 7 seasons and the host of the Just Basketball Show, wherever you get your podcasts. A big thank you for everyone out there spending your Wednesday with us, making us your first listen to kick off your day. We are free and available everywhere, including YouTube, so hit that follow or subscribe button. Get locked onto the Phoenix Suns. Stay locked onto the Phoenix Suns each and every day, all off season long. We got a lot to hit on news-wise. As I keep promising you, the news does keep rolling in here in Suns land. Starting with Kevon Looney. Now, he has recently appeared on the Draymond Green Show podcast and acknowledged that he doesn't know if he will be on the Warriors this upcoming season. He said, the ball isn't in my court. I don't have full control, so I kind of have to play the waiting game. He has an $8 million contract for this upcoming season, which is fully non-guaranteed. And the decision date is on the 24th. The team will have to make its decision about whether to keep Kevon Looney by June 24th, which is less than 2 weeks away. And it could go either way, truly. I mean, I think you might lean that they just cut him, given their financial constraints. There's a lot to mull over in Golden State this offseason, from Chris Paul's non-guaranteed contract to Klay Thompson being a free agent to any number of other trades they might want to make to improve things and all of it after a disappointing season out there. And Looney making $8 million, a player that, frankly, didn't even factor into the rotation down the stretch of the season. That's a difficult thing to stomach at that price tag, you know? He played the final 3 games of the regular season, but got DNPs or played very few minutes for much of it. I believe in the play-in game, may not have played at all. $8 million is hefty there. So, in come the Suns, right? And any free agent center that pops up in the NBA marketplace, so to speak, like, you gotta consider the Suns for that player. But here's the thing. I like Kevon Looney from the standpoint of versatility. On the defensive end, we know that he can execute in a variety of different ways. He's only 28, but it's an old 28. He's been plagued with injuries for a while and feels like he's slowing down, unfortunately for him. So he's not a rim protector. He's not some sort of crazy athletic center, but we've seen him switch. We've seen him, swarm. We've seen him drop down into the paint. He's a good rebounder. So I like that. I like that he is, for all intents and purposes, and probably the number one thing you would say if you were thinking the Warriors would keep him around, is that as a locker room presence for years now, even dating back to when Kevin Durant was in place out there, it has always felt like Looney was quietly a major kind of bring people together guy for that team. And so if he were to be let go and the Warriors, I guess, are fine and comfortable moving on from that, that's huge to get for any team. And the Suns certainly need more guys like that, especially just the turnover of the roster and everything else. The relationship with Durant doesn't hurt. I don't pretend to know if those guys were best friends or anything, but Looney was at one point compared to KD, and they kind of had a connection there because Looney was a freakish dude in high school, and just, again, those injuries sapped him. And then, of course, as teammates, you never heard of any problems, and Looney is just a respected dude, so it could be nice for KD to have a familiar face. That always goes a long way. Now, being realistic, there's a reason the Warriors didn't play him a lot down the stretch. There's a reason that they might cut him. Off-the-court stuff is great. The attributes I mentioned are nice to have, but Looney he's always been undersized. He's never been an incredible athlete since those injuries hampered him at a younger age. And these days, the offensive game is, I don't want to say, non-existent or something overly harsh on him, but at the same time, reality is he's not a shooter from deep. He's not an elite playmaker like setting guys up, dropping dimes. I've obviously playing in that Warriors system, there's an IQ and a dribble handoff awareness and, two-man game chemistry that you pick up. And so I trust Looney would do that. But if you're talking about a team where Jusuf Nurkic at times was a negative for the Suns, if all of that other stuff was not clicking because he could not consistently put the ball in the basket and be a threat to score, I worry that Looney is similar. So here's where I come down. I like Looney if Nurkic were to be traded. All right, if we're talking about a world where the Suns really mix up the roster, Nurkic is not necessarily around, and Looney is one of the pieces of a new-look center rotation. I think he's a guy who can still play minutes in the NBA. I think on a team with more scoring power, more scoring firepower, like the Suns have with Durant and Booker and Beal and even Allen, and you would expect maybe Gordon comes back. They're good on offense, whereas the Warriors, with Klay aging and Wiggins taking a step back last year and Steph also obviously aging and everything else, they couldn't always afford to have more of a defensive screener, passer, rebounder dude out there because they needed every ounce of scoring they could get, which is why eventually they bench Looney for, Saric early in the season was getting more minutes. Trace Jackson-Davis comes along, and he's kind of a lob threat, scorer, athlete, offensive option for them in the pick and roll, and they go that direction. The Suns could weather that storm better. I don't like it if it's 48 minutes of a scoring question mark like Looney and Nurkic would be, but I like Looney in place of Nurkic. Looney is not the best the Suns can do, okay? Even with all that said. I would think Andre Drummond is probably a better option. There's some trade targets, like we've talked about Nick Richards, who's maybe more well-rounded because he has that athleticism and height that Looney doesn't necessarily have. And there's players in the draft, now less proven, big questions there of a rookie contributing or, draft players developing at all. That's a risk. But I think I might like a few of those guys better based on their pedigree and their traits as players more than Looney too. But again, if you're imagining a world where Nurkic is gone, which is where I think Looney could come into play, maybe you get one of those guys in the draft, or you get Drummond, who's a little bit of a different player, or Richards in a trade, or a player like those guys, and Looney is playing 15 minutes a night for you. I love it in that case. And I think the Suns should not be this whole offseason is going to be about being a little nimble, a little flexible, a little bit opportunistic. That is part of their draft approach here, it seems, which is what we'll get to next. But I wouldn't be thinking about, oh no, not Looney because he's too similar to Nurkic. Well, what if a Nurkic trade comes available? What if a different opportunity than you expected? You want to do your diligence on Looney and think about how he could fit and be ready to strike on any of these pathways. And if that's the approach and those dominoes fall, Looney would be a really solid addition in the locker room, on the court, to the center spot for the Phoenix Suns. On the wing, next, the Suns brought in Jaylen Tyson for a draft workout, the only first-round caliber prospect that we know the Suns have brought in. What is Jaylen Tyson as a player, and what insights can we get about the Suns, how they're looking at the draft this year based on bringing Tyson in? Next. First, today's show brought to you by BetterHelp, coming in, making therapy more accessible, affordable, and convenient for anyone who needs it. That's a mission that I personally think is pretty nice, and we love here at the Locked On Podcast Network. We all carry around different stressors, big and small, and we keep them bottled up. It can affect us negatively. Therapy, though, is a safe space. You get things off your chest and figure out how to work through whatever's weighing you down. BetterHelp can be, and therapy can be, just to share what is going on in your life. Get that weight lifted. It's with somebody who is outside of your life, a professional, not a friend or a family member who might be part of what is going on with you that's tough. It's that extra external, separate person who can really help you out. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's online, convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you got to do to get started is fill out a brief questionnaire, get matched with a licensed therapist, and then switch therapists as needed at any time for no additional charge to get the person that suits you best. Get it off your chest with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA. All right, let's keep the show rolling here. Jaylen Tyson came in for a workout, reportedly. You know, there's people watching who's posting on their Instagram story what of the smaller agencies that like to hype up where their players are getting some buzz and all that. And, you know, if you are keeping up and paying attention, those guys can pop out. And Tyson, who started out at Texas, went to Texas Tech as a sophomore, and most recently was at Cal as a junior. He's a 21, about to turn 22, 6'7" wing. And he's in an interesting situation where he comes to Cal and his usage just skyrockets. So it's like he barely plays as a freshman, but it's at 19% that year. 19% as a sophomore at Texas Tech, where he started 31 of 31 games and had a big role. But then this past year at Cal, it jumps up to 30%. So he ran a lot of pick and roll. He has the ball in his hands a lot. He's, lob passes and pull-up jumpers and a lot of things that when you look at him and his profile as a player, first of all, I don't scout these guys throughout the season because I don't think the Suns are going to make a pick. They haven't made a pick for 4 years. I don't know if one's coming anytime soon in the first round, so I'm not, plugged into college basketball. That's the first thing I got to preface all this with. But of course, the other thing is players develop. So I'm not trying to put a cap on this young man who I don't know. All I'm saying is Jaylen Tyson looks to be a little bit limited athletically compared to a lot of, wing prospects in the draft, especially guys who might be first-round prospects. And, I like his low center of gravity. You watch him on some of these drives, and those aren't always with the ball in his hands. He can catch the ball and attack a closeout, and he gets really, really low to the ground, is able to keep his dribble, absorb contact. There's some qualities that I think will translate as a maybe one-on-one creator-scorer guy, but that's probably not what he would be on the Suns, and that's probably not what he would be in, the NBA, at least early in his career. So with that said, it makes him a little bit hard to evaluate because he was doing things in college that he probably won't do in the NBA and certainly wouldn't need to be doing on a loaded offensive star-laden team like this Suns roster is. So what do we do with that? Well, I think first off, he is a very James Jones type of player. In fact, for a lot of the reasons that I just said he's a question mark, he also fits how Jones has tended to lean in the draft, right? Guys who can shoot. Tyson is a career 37% three-point shooter and 78% free throw shooter in college on 250 three-point attempts. So at least feels like he could be an average three-point shooter in the NBA, although frankly, he took so many pull-ups this year and the percentage was still relatively high. I could see him maybe on spot-ups and corner shots and things like that as a younger player, maybe even being above average as a shooter. The lack of, I guess the leaning in his game toward IQ and awareness and reading of the game over pure athleticism is also something we have seen the Suns go to, whether that is Cam Johnson or Jalen Smith or even, frankly, some of the veteran, younger role players that the Suns have targeted over the years as well. Keita Bates-Diop or Landry Shamet, So I can see it. I can definitely see it. The Ringer, Kevin O'Connor at The Ringer has Tyson as his 31st ranked prospect and has the comparison as Jared Dudley. If you watch this guy's clips, you can 100% see it. One thing to note, though, is I believe at the Combine when Tyson got formally measured, he was 6'5.5" instead of 6'7", which is what he was listed at Cal. So, you're not talking about a guy with Jason Tatum size. You're talking about a dude who's, Royce O'Neal sized. That does make a difference, especially when you're talking about not an elite athlete. He plays a little smaller than that 6'7" frame. He has a 6'8" wingspan, but so Jared Dudley makes a lot of sense there. And ESPN has him as its 28th ranked prospect. And I believe NBADraft.net, which is a really, really good website that has tracks these guys from when they're in high school and has a lot of info and data on them. They have Desmond Bane as a comp, which feels crazy to me, but they have him at 19 in their rankings. So we talked about a lot of the bigs. We talked about Tyler Kolek, who's a point guard prospect, reportedly might have a little bit of a promise from a team in the first round. Same with Day'Ron Holmes. We've talked about Khalil Ware. There's all sorts of other guys out there that I haven't touched on. I'll have Zach Cohen of Real GM on soon to break down the draft from a Sun standpoint. But Tyson would be fine. Tyson makes sense. Tyson seems like a fit and matches what the Suns like to get in the draft. Bigger picture, since frankly, players come for workouts, especially with the Suns, who have been under James Jones, very, very tight-lipped about who they bring in. Teams are not obligated to announce who they work out. Some teams do it for hype and publicity and whatever, attention. If they're a bad team that wants to get some fans excited about the next guys, or they're in the lottery and they want to keep the attention going on them. The Suns have never done that. There could be 50 other players the Suns have worked out and we would never know about it. So I'm not going to say just because we know Tyson was here for a workout that means he's their number one prospect or anything like that. But with the 22nd overall pick, I guess my main read is it's just nice to see the Suns are looking at wings. And I kind of match it back up to John Gambadoro's report from last week, which we talked about on Monday's show on this podcast, regarding the Suns looking for not only just another wing as one of their main priorities this offseason, but a young athletic wing. Now, Tyson's not the most athletic dude, but he definitely, obviously, would be younger than, whoever you want to bring up from free agency. So that's nice to see. The other thing is just the kind of approach to the draft in general, right? I'm not going to, again, because we don't know the full extent of how the workouts are happening. We know the Suns went to the Combine, but great, it's what you're paid to do. I'm not going to overreact there. All I will say is the Suns are not punting on this draft, right? They're not just saying we're trading the pick, F it. We don't need to do any, scouting or work here in the lead up. I would like to believe that under Matt Ishbia, the Suns have allocated more resources toward scouting, draft prep, big board development and having an eye and an awareness on as many players as possible. I've talked before, a workout this time of year, an interview, a meeting, breakdown, a scouting report from somebody in the front office. Even if you know you're trading your pick or you know you have your sights set on a Jalen Smith at 10 and it's unlikely anybody's going to blow past you to go get that guy, Cam Johnson, they were apparently going to pick him as high as 6th 5 years ago in that 2019 draft, so maybe they just know their guys. Even if that's all true, the early work, the early contact you make with players, it can come back to help you in the future. So I hope they're continuing to do that. The fact that they are bringing players in, Bronny, of course, being one, but guys more in line with who they would actually pick at 22, like Tyson as well, that all speaks to a good sign in my eyes that they are approaching this with at least a chance that they make a pick and trying to be ready to make that pick if a trade does not materialize. Because you can't force a team to accept a trade. You might want such and such or so on a different team, but if you put all your eggs in that basket and then that player does not ultimately, that trade, that team, that rival GM does not ultimately make that deal with you and you don't get that player in that trade and now all of a sudden you're on the clock, obviously those things happen over weeks, but you want to be ready. Let's close out talking coaching. Maybe the biggest news of the day from a pure Suns standpoint is that Mike Hopkins, who coached at Washington for many years, was an assistant at Syracuse before that, is joining Mike Budenholzer's coaching staff here in Phoenix. Surprising move. What does it mean? We'll get to it next. First, today's show brought to you by the FanDuel Sportsbook, the official sportsbook of the Locked On Podcast Network. Summertime means baseball, the NBA Finals, and more. And you can bet on all of it at FanDuel. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $200 you can use to bet on everything from the Finals MVP to who's going to hit one out of the park. Let's see what FanDuel has cooking for NBA Finals Game 3 on Wednesday night, when many of you will be listening to this. You can get Luka to score 50 for plus 2,300. That feels a little crazy. But look, what you're looking for really is big minus odds to get yourself started, and then you go from there. So Jason Tatum to score 20 plus is minus 950. Now, he hasn't even done that in every game. But I like Luka to score 25 plus. That's minus 1,000. You're not trying to win money. You're trying to get your bonus bets and go to work. Then you can bounce around the WNBA, baseball, the NBA, wherever, and get some more adventurous wagers on your docket. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to try it out and add a big win to your summer bucket list. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Closing out the show, Mike Hopkins, new Suns assistant coach. Who saw that coming? I surely did not, but it's a couple of different trends coming together in one, right? First of all, obviously the big news of the week in the NBA, aside from the finals, has been Danny Hurley and the Lakers' pursuit of the back-to-back national champion head coach at UConn, and ultimately Hurley saying no. Now, with how much change has happened and coaches like Coach K and Roy Williams and Jay Wright stepping down at blue blood programs around the country lately, it's been a talking point that anytime a coach, Nick Saban, of course, too, steps away, oh, wow, college sports is dying, everything's a mess, blah, blah, blah. Mike Hopkins got fired separately from that, so I'm not going to put him in that bucket. But it is noteworthy, right, that this week alone, the Suns have announced two different coaches where they've announced two different college coaches making the leap to the NBA here in Phoenix. One was Brian Gregory, who I talked about on yesterday's show, who was most recently a head coach at the University of South Florida, coming to be the vice president of player programming, kind of a personal development guy behind the scenes under James Jones's staff. And now Mike Hopkins coming to Phoenix to be part of a coaching staff under Mike Budenholzer. It's just an interesting wrinkle within the basketball world that the Suns are clearly taking advantage of. If you look in past years, the Suns pretty much never looked at the college ranks for anybody associated with the team. They, had Jeff Hornacek, who was, a former NBA player. They had Monty Williams, who's been an NBA player, executive, coach, on and on down the line. It's never really been how they've approached things. But whether it's Matt Ishbia and his relationship with Tom Izzo and his connection to the Michigan State program, or just more of these guys becoming available, it'll just be interesting to watch how that impacts the world of the Suns. James Jones is not a college guy, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's here. The other part of this that's interesting is something that Gerald Bourguet of PHNX noted that I thought was a good point, which is that a lot of the people that the Suns have hired to join Bud's staff have been player development oriented. Obviously, David Fizdale is remaining here. He is largely kind of a defensive guy and has the respect as a former head coach to be, maybe a little higher on the pecking order, not in the trenches of skill development and everything else, but whether it's Chad Forcier or it's Chasson Randall or now Mike Hopkins, these are guys who have worked either in NBA player development or young player, out of high school through to potentially pursuing a pro career level as college and NBA coaches. I am optimistic. I want to believe that the Suns are orienting their program overall more in that direction now. We don't know. We can't know how they approach this draft, how they approach undrafted free agents, two-way contracts, the G League program. It'll tell us a lot as the year continues here. Matt Ishbia still is only in his first full year as owner. But I just like that they are looking that way, right? You think about Monty Williams' staff, his first staff here. It was honestly, it was awesome to see the level of investment that Robert Sarver finally put into that staff, and it was full of guys who had their sights set on becoming NBA head coaches. If you just think, under Monty Williams, the Suns had 3 different guys who came through here who eventually became head coaches. Darko Rajakovic, who's now the coach in Toronto, was Monty's staff year 1. Willie Green became a head coach in New Orleans, of course, and then now Kevin Young, who easily could have gotten the Suns job last year, was up for head coaching jobs in the NBA this year and is now the head coach at BYU. That's pretty impressive. Mark Bryan is a respected, reputable guy, and many more. So there's nothing wrong with that, but that's just very much we're going to develop coaches. We're going to have a bunch of, strategic brain power and experience in the league, and we're going to have that carry us. Here, it's a little bit more, let's maybe approach things more from a base level of guys getting better while they're here. We didn't see a whole lot of that in Phoenix in past seasons under Monty, under Frank Vogel. It's hard to point to a player who wasn't already, a high draft pick who got a whole lot better while they were with the Suns. Between the roster approach from James Jones and the coaching staff approach and obviously just this overall win now mentality, the Suns didn't really have that. So my hope is they might be trying to do both at once now. Of course, there's a bunch of pressure to win. I'm not overlooking that. That's number one by a mile. It doesn't really matter if some undrafted free agent gets 15% better if they lose in the first round again. Nobody would be silly enough to say that. But the best teams do all of it. The best teams invest in all aspects of building a program, building an organization, and you can get, I know I keep using these examples and they seem silly because it doesn't feel like they're difference makers, but even if you're just talking about a salary cap crunch and the value of a younger role player, or I guess I should say a little bit of a less expensive role player because they're younger, they're not making as much money. That can be really helpful. If you turn a second-round player into somebody that can contribute, that's huge. Tyrese Maxey for the Sixers, obviously late first-round pick, but similar thing. He turns into an all-star, but he's making next to nothing. You get to have James Harden on your team, and now you get all this cap space and everything else. So whatever way you want to look at it, turning question mark players late in the draft, on the scrap heap, from overseas, whatever, into real players, it can be so important. And you really only have to hit on one or two over 4 or 5 years for it to really reap the benefit. I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit. None of that's happened yet. There's a long way to go. But that's the potential when you actually treat that aspect of your organization with purpose and you gear resources toward it. And I hope that with Hopkins and Gregory and Randall and Forcier, those guys that Bud is bringing in and that Ishbia is bringing in can maybe help the Suns do that a little bit more. Lastly, a little bit of a conspiracy or, reading the tea leaves, but hey, it's not bad to have an assistant coach who ran a program for many years that has churned out some NBA. He was a great recruiter. You can point to different questionable things here and there with Lorenzo Romar and everything else over at Washington, but, just in the Mike Hopkins era, they had Jaden McDaniels come through. They had, I don't believe Markelle Fultz was there, but 2017-18 team had Matisse Thybulle, of course. I mentioned Jaden McDaniels, Jalen Noel who was bounced around, was with Minnesota a little bit, Isaiah Stewart. So it's nice to have that. I'm not saying, Markelle Fultz, just because they both have the Washington connection, is going to be a Sun or anything, but all those little relationships and familiarities do add up, and it does matter, and it's something to just keep an eye on when you're bringing in college people. They're going to have different ties to different people in the industry and different players, and it's just a new look staff. This whole thing has really gotten turned over. Brian Windhorst used the phrase on Pardon the Interruption the other day, clean slate. The roster's, of course, going to be turned over quite a bit, but everything else is too. Coaching staff, front office, everything. So we'll see what that means. That'll wrap us up for the day. Hit follow or subscribe if you haven't already. Steven Perjone will be back tomorrow to talk hoops with us, as he does every week. Find something good to break down. Hit follow, hit subscribe. Once again, get that episode and more throughout the offseason as the news rolls in, and I'll catch you guys tomorrow.